Another thing that I found really interesting over the last couple days of the FOH training here is how many of the questions that people raise about biblical equality are the same here as they are in the United States. Now, of course, there are the questions like, is a woman inherently unclean because of menstruation? Or what should we do about dowries? But a lot of the questions are exactly the same ones you hear in the States. So for instance, Reverend Allen brought up the Mothers Union, which is something that the Anglican Church has. I think it's sort of like a women's aid thing, I'm not entirely sure. But he talks about how they teach that a good woman is very servile to her man, and when the man comes home, she will run out to him and she will take his coat before he's even in the door, and when he gets inside, she'll sit him down in a chair and she'll take his shoes off of him and she'll put his feet up on a stool and she'll bring him a drink, and that's what makes a good woman. But Reverend Allen made the excellent point that this completely excludes single women or women who are widowed. And does that mean they can't be good women? This is really a strange way of thinking about womanhood and about godly womanhood that we have in the West as well. You know, I think of all our Bible studies that are geared for moms or for married women. When we only have Bible studies in the morning, when most single women are at work, that's an issue. When we're only studying topics pertaining to parenting or to marriage, that's really an issue because it excludes, well, at least in the USA, it excludes about half of women. If you think about that, about half of women are not married. So we really need to think about that. That's an issue here in Kenya, and that's an issue at home in the United States. Another question that came up is if the husband isn't the final authority in the house, if his word isn't law above everything else, how does a house run? How can a house run if you don't have one person who's in charge? And that is an interesting question, and I was able to share a little bit. Reverend Paul, I believe, no, Reverend Ken. Lots of reverends around here. Reverend Ken asked me a little bit about what it looks like for me. You know, here I am, a married woman with 4 children, far away in Africa. And what is my husband and what are my children doing while I'm over here? And I have the opportunity then to explain that in my marriage to Aaron, in our marriage, we believe that Christ is the head. And we work together as partners to accomplish God's purposes for our lives. So when Aaron heard about this opportunity for me to come to Kenya and do this training, he said, Jenny, this is obviously something that God is doing. You have to go. And I will sacrifice, I will take care of the kids. I will do these things because this is obviously what God is doing in your life. And likewise, when Aaron has had things that he's needed to do, I've been supportive of that, and I've been willing to make sacrifices, and I've been willing to do things that helped him do the things that God is clearly calling him to do. So, do we need one person to be in charge? Well, absolutely not. If both parties are submitted to Christ, and if they're committed to finding out what God's will is from one another, and they're submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, and they're honoring the other above themselves, it works out quite nicely. But it requires both parties to be very humble and to be very willing to submit themselves to the needs of others and to what God might be doing in the life of the other person instead of being self-focused. So that's an issue here, and that's an issue here in Kenya, and that's also an issue at home. Another thing that came up quite a bit was the issue of girls who are looking to find their identity in their relationship with a man instead of in their relationship with God. And boy, this is a big one. Because, in the States, it's constant. We constantly see women who have all these incredible opportunities that women here would that are just almost unthinkable to women here. All these amazing opportunities we've been given. And yet so many times we see girls just in many ways throwing their lives away on boys who are really bad news for them. Getting in relationships with abusive men, with men who don't respect them, with men who really are going to do nothing to encourage them in their walk with Christ, and in fact are going to detract greatly from their walk with Christ because they need to be in a relationship and because they value male affirmation above pretty much everything else, that their identity is in who they are to a man instead of in who God is to them. So huge problem in both places. People are just the same wherever you go. And there are always the same issues wearing their own unique cultural disguises. And it's just been really, really interesting to see the way that some of these insidious issues disguise themselves in different cultures. So, can we be more conscious of all the women in our churches instead of just only teaching that part of womanhood that's being a wife and mother? Can we let God be the ultimate authority in our homes instead of assuming that one person is the one who hears from God and acts out God's will? And can we really start finding our worth and identity in Christ instead of, in the case of women, in our relationships with men, or in the case of men, finding their identity in the way that they're able to control their environment or control the people or the world around them through work or through relationships where they're in charge or whatever it is? Can we really be people who find our identity in Christ instead of whatever it is that wants to draw us away from that? So it's very interesting.